folks, thanks for joining me. I thought today we'd have a little chat about Ujjayi Breathing and Ujjayi Pranayama, which are somewhat different things. As always, please, if you have any questions about anything that I mentioned, just pop a little note in the comments and I'll get back to you. I'd like to hear from you, and I'd just like to say thank you for allowing me to share these practices of yoga with you, particularly the practices of pranayama, which, as I've mentioned many times before, are really the jewel in the crown of the Hatha Yoga practice. So the word Ujjayi roughly translates as victorious. It's like the winner's breath. And it comes in two forms. There's Ujjayi Breathing and Ujjayi Pranayama. So Ujjayi Breathing is where we breathe through the nose, but with a sense of the breath first touching the body in the throat. So it makes a little rasping sound in the back of the throat, which is sometimes described as being the wind in the trees or the sound of the ocean or water in a stream. Some people like to call it Darth Vader breath, but it's actually a fairly subtle sound. If you're unfamiliar with it, you can try just closing your mouth and breathing with a sense of the breath in the throat, sort of circulating in the back of the throat. If that doesn't help you to get a sense of Ujjayi, then another way is to sort of take an exhalation through the mouth, and then halfway through the exhalation, just close your mouth and keep breathing. It's a bit like you're misting a mirror with your mouth, that sort of kind of sound, but just through the nose. So it's a slight constriction of the glottis that makes the sound of the breath a little bit more obvious, and also makes the breath just a tiny bit more restricted. It does paradoxically allow you to breathe even when the sinuses are a little bit more blocked. So if we move that sort of first touch of the breath from the nostrils down into the throat, it allows us to breathe through relatively blocked sinuses much more easily than what we would if we were breathing from the nostrils, to think of it in that way. So as an aid to pranayama, this Ujjayi breath, this constriction in the throat, is very beneficial because the slightly exaggerated sound of the breath makes it a lot easier to focus on that sound and then to balance it, to keep it nice and smooth and consistent. And it also helps to draw our attention within, so that sound being internal helps to bring the sense of pratyahara, of turning the senses within. It's also, I would suggest, the way we should be trying to breathe every breath every single day. So we're not breathing through the mouth, we're breathing through the nose. Our nose is sort of like an air conditioner for the body, so it brings the breath, or the external air, let's say, up to temperature and humidity that makes it most readily absorbed by the body. So breathing through the nose, both in and out, is really the ideal way to breathe whenever we can. Ideally, after a bit of practice, every breath every day will be taken more or less in that Ujjayi fashion. The other thing I just want to mention is, whilst we often try to work with Ujjayi breathing in our asana practice, in some traditions, I believe mistakenly, there's a sense of really exaggerating that Ujjayi breath, so that you can be in a room of 20 or 30 people and you can hear someone breathing on the other side of the room. Some years ago I did do a workshop with a somewhat old school practitioner who told someone who was breathing in that loud Ujjayi to stop breathing like a panting dog. And whilst perhaps that's a little bit extreme, I think better to think of that loud Ujjayi as like our training wheels version of the breath. So being loud with the breath perhaps makes it easier to get the sense of it, the mechanisms involved to start with. But once we have figured out how to do it, then just like with all the elements of our practice, I think we need to refine it so that ultimately we can hear that we're using Ujjayi, but our breath should be very quiet and calm so that the people around us can maybe barely hear it or not at all. But essentially we're using that same mechanism but slowing and quietening, refining our breath. But ideally we are still using Ujjayi in our asana practice. And of course, The second part of Ujjayi is Ujjayi Pranayama, which I believe again is the most important of all the pranayamas. It's essentially just a balancing of in and out breath. So however long we inhale for, we exhale for the same amount of time. And people often talk about Nadi Shodhana as being a balancing breath, and certainly Nadi Shodhana, the alternate nostril in, left out, right out, left, is a very balancing rhythm. But of course it requires us to stick our hand up to our face and precludes us from doing anything else with our right hand or left hand if we're using that. So Ujjayi is also a balancing breath because it's balancing prana and apana, in breath and out breath. So perhaps not as strong as Nadi Shodhana, but once we start to implement Ujjayi in our day-to-day life, we can actually be using balancing pranayama all throughout our conscious waking day. So in that sense, I believe it's actually really the one most important pranayama. If there's only one you learn to practice, this for me would be the single most important of all of them, because it can be a breath you take every single day. So of course, Ujjayi Pranayama uses the Ujjayi breathing technique, so we're still breathing through the nose, but with a sense of the breath touching the body in the throat. And with slow pranayams, we generally want to develop a sense of inhaling upwards from the bottom of the lungs to the top and exhaling from the top of the lungs down to the bottom. So think of it the way you would pour water into and out of a glass. So when you pour the water out of a jug into a glass, it fills the bottom of the glass first and then fills to the top. And when you empty the glass out, it empties from the top and eventually drains down to the bottom. So generally speaking, although there's exceptions, but generally speaking with our pranayama rhythms, that's the way we should think of taking our breath. So our Ujjayi breath starts filling down into the bottom of the lungs, fills up to the top, and then working towards the sense of reversing that movement on the exhalation. So without any specific length of time, it should look and sound a little bit like this. Hopefully that gives you a visual sense of what I mentioned, filling from bottom to top and emptying top to bottom. And as with all pranayams, it takes many months and years of practice to really refine them. So work with a length of rhythm that's comfortable for you. That might be 5 seconds in and out, it might be 8, or it might be 10, or over years of practice you can extend it out. I believe everyone can access 1 breath a minute, but it does take many years of practice. But we always work with our own capacity on any given day, so never forcing the breath because of its direct connection to our nervous system. So that's it for Ujjayi, both Ujjayi breathing and Ujjayi pranayama. As I said, if you have any questions, just pop them in the comments, and try to start implementing Ujjayi as the breath you take from the moment you wake up to the moment you fall asleep. Thank you very much. I'll see you soon.